Russian forces continue to advance into new areas of Bakhmut and are rapidly approaching the western border of the city. Meanwhile, Ukraine is fighting both north and south of town to try and force the Russians back. Massive explosions took place over the weekend in western Ukraine, raising fears that the Russians have destroyed valuable ammunition needed for Ukraine's offensive. All of this in today's Frontline report. First, we are going to start in the area of Bakhmut with advances and frontline changes from both the Ukrainians and the Russians. Just a quick reminder to please hit both like and subscribe buttons if you would like to see more of these Ukraine war updates in your timeline. And I would also like to give a quick shout out to AF and Chris for the super chats. Donations are always very appreciated. Russian forces over the weekend shook off the initial shock of the Ukrainian counterattacks and forced their way through several city blocks to nearly reach the far western outskirts of Bakhmut. The day started with Russian mercenaries only having a few blocks to go before capturing the city. But in the time since the front lines have been confirmed, there have been reports of fighting at the children's hospital that sits between the Ukrainian-held Bakhmut citadel and the supply roads that connect it to the north. This information has been paired up with rumors of possible nighttime battle operations being carried out by the Russian mercenaries. Should the hospital fall, the Ukrainians will have a lot of difficulty supporting and resupplying their forces in the final fortified area of Bakhmut. Inside the citadel, the situation isn't much better. Russian troops have forced their way through the outer perimeter and struck a dagger through the middle of the Ukrainian defense, capturing nearly all the buildings running parallel down Levanskogo Street, the main artery that divides the citadel. Over the next few days, the Russian forces will attempt to clear the area and capture various schools and government offices that are scattered throughout the area. At the southern end of the citadel, Ukrainian troops had to retreat from the outer high-rise structures and set up a defense around a movie theater. If Russian forces continue to move in this direction, they might meet up with their forces on Levanskogo Street and encircle a pocket of Ukrainian troops. It will be imperative for the Ukrainians to withdraw from the schools number 12, 16, and 47 before that happens. While these negative events are developing for the Ukrainian army, they do not sit idly by. Ukraine continues to liberate territory to the south of town in the area of Klishchivka. Ukrainian troops have recaptured all of the forest areas south of Chasiv Yar. Now, there are contradictory reports from the Ukrainian side claiming they encircled and destroyed Russian forces in the forests, and the Russians are claiming that they withdrew from the position. So there's definitely some back and forth there. We're not really exactly sure what happened. What we do know is the Ukrainians now control this chunk of land. One bit of information that is being reported by both sides is that Ukraine managed to kill a number of Russian command staff in the area, probably via a missile strike on the local command post wherever it was. There are reports of 2 killed Russian colonels and a number of officers wounded or in critical condition. Russia claims the situation in the area has now been stabilized, although that remains to be seen. There is, however, the sudden appearance of the Russian 4th Motor Rifle Brigade, suggesting the Russians have brought in anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 additional troops to hold the line at Klishchivka. To the north of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have advanced and the Russians have withdrawn from their furthest outposts along the M03 highway. This has taken the pressure off the Ukrainian army in the area, as the Russians sat just a few kilometers away from capturing 4 more towns and reaching the banks of the Donbas Canal, something that is no longer an option. Overall, the Bakhmut environment is still pretty dim for the Ukrainian army, although it has improved their situation significantly. I can confidently say that the threat of encirclement for the Ukrainians no longer exists, but neither does the prospect of easily reversing the situation in Bakhmut. At this point, Russia has made so much progress in the city, and the Ukrainian troops have been starved of supplies for so long. The biggest benefit the latest assault actions will bring is to enable an orderly withdrawal from the city and a stable defensive line to be established between Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar, a fortified town surrounded by forests that rests on top of a hill. After the Battle of Bakhmut's conclusion, the Ukrainian forces in the area stand a good chance at preventing further Russian western movement. In other wartime news about Ukraine, the stories of new British cruise missiles being used inside of Ukraine are beginning to proliferate, with several explosions inside of the city of Lugansk happening over the weekend. The Russians have credited these explosions to these new Storm Shadow missiles that have been delivered to Ukraine via the British military. I am not sure if this is in fact the case. The strikes could have also been carried out by HIMARS or new Ukrainian missiles called Grom-2. Nevertheless, it appears like a barracks or training ground in Lugansk was destroyed. There was also a flurry of Russian strikes deep in the heart of Ukraine, in the cities of Khmelnytsky and Ternopil, with a particularly massive detonation happening at the former. There have been reports from the Ukrainian side that the Russians hit an unimportant object of some industrial or chemical nature, but due to the size of the blast and the nature of the storage site, it probably is safe to assume that the Russians hit the bingo on a Ukrainian ammunition depot. While this does appear to be acknowledged by Western media, there is one bit of information that is only being reported from the Russian news media side. The Russians are claiming that the warehouse they struck contained depleted uranium ammunition sent to Ukraine for use in the British Challenger 2 tanks that Ukraine received earlier this year. If this is true, not only is this a significant loss in terms of ammunition needed for offensive operations, but it is also potentially dangerous for the local population. Russian channels are spreading rumors that teams of personnel are scanning the area for radiation, that the local water is undrinkable, and that there is currently a cover-up to prevent panic. While none of this can be proven and will likely be labeled by Ukraine and the West as disinformation, there are two curious data points. First is the EU radiological map that uses sensors to detect gamma radiation. While there are no huge issues, there is a sudden spike at the Khmelnytsky sensor that shows from the 11th to the 15th a heightened amount of gamma radiation. While this isn't out of the ordinary and is within living conditions, there is also a curious video posted by the Ukrainians that shows one of the fires in Ternopil being put out by a robot. Now, the purpose in using a robot is to take the place of a human in conditions that are less safe. But there can also be many different factors that make the situation unsafe. First, of course, is radiation. It would definitely be a factor where a firefighting robot would be used. But next would also be toxic chemicals. So, firefighters would want to use a robot in those situations, and also unstable compounds such as undetonated explosives. So while the presence of a firefighting robot might not mean that the Russians destroyed depleted uranium ammunition, it does signal that they struck something dangerous, at least to the point where firemen did not want to get near it to put it out. Finally, we will take a look at the entire map of the battlefronts. Aside from the typical fighting we see in the Donbass and near Bakhmut, there is also a Russian offensive operation taking place in the Kupiansk area. I made a video about this earlier, so be sure to go to my channel and check it out. Well, guys, that's all from me, so until next time.